Gators Breakdown episode 106 is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. The Gators coaching staff hit the recruiting trail last week during the bye week. What's the word on how these recruits feel about Florida after a 3-3 start to the 2017 season? And to help me break that all down is Blake Alderman from 247 Sports, GatorBait.net. You can follow Blake on Twitter at Blake_Alderman. Blake, thanks again for joining and talking some Gators and Gators recruiting here on Gators Breakdown.
Yeah, man, always good to be on.
Yeah, for sure. Remember, you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Just search on those sites or get the links by following Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook at Gators Breakdown. And when you're on iTunes, please rate and review the show. So, Blake, we're talking about the season and how the Gators are 3-3 now, and recruiting doesn't seem to be slowing down at all. And of course, the bye week was last week, and the coaches were everywhere. It seemed all throughout the week. What was some of the highlights of the coaches, whether in South Florida or in Louisiana or up in Georgia? What was some of the highlights that these the staff and the assistants and the head coach Jim McElwain threw out there?
It seemed that the emphasis of the week was to hit just about all of their commitments between the 2018-2019 class and really kind of hitting your big targets. You start out the week with McElwain. He stops by IMG Academy, loaded, school full of 4- and 5-star prospects, making his rounds in Tampa. Richard Garage, Nicholas Petit-Frere. You've got Skipper and Dixon that went out to see Copeland and Jamar Chase on Monday. So, a lot of the more important guys, get your visits on Monday. Tuesday they go and see William Barnes and Ed Monolith, two big offensive lineman targets that Florida really likes. Trey Hill, Christian Armstrong, the FSU commit. A lot of these offensive linemen, I don't know if you're picking up a trend there, but, a lot of these offensive linemen were the ones that they saw on the first day. On Tuesday, Richard Jabuner, Quay Walker, these linebackers, other big-time targets, just kind of rolling down my list. There were so many there. On Thursday, Mack and Corey Bell were there to see at Southridge to see Mark Pope, the Miami wide receiver commit, play. Into their Friday with seeing the Heritage kids, which is loaded, Pat Surtain, Tyson Campbell, Andrew Chatfield, and Anthony Schwartz, all those guys that Florida are in on right now. Nesta Silvera is a guy that Miami commit, seems to be solid right now, but I'm interested to see if he takes visits down the road. But Channing Tindall, obviously Florida goes to see the big-time quarterback Matt Corral, sitting Doug Nussmeier out there on Friday to see their quarterback commit throw for 5 touchdowns and an 81-0 win. So, it was a productive week. They really saw a lot of guys between the 18 and the 19 class. So, it's kind of just, we're still here. We're still thinking about you kind of thing. We're on our bye week, and, then Florida is back to business with the season. And then after the season ends, that's when you'll see them kind of turn the page and really start to see more of these prospects at school and whatnot. Two guys that I did note, Florida did make 2 offers out. They offered a Mississippi State offensive lineman commit, and they offered a Rutgers offensive lineman commit. So, it seems like, Florida lands Richard Garage. They have Curtis Dunlap in the fold, guys that I mentioned there that they're going to see. But Florida wants to take 5 offensive linemen, so they really want to sign a deep class there. I think these new offers are more just kind of secondary options. If, a very wide open Nick Petit-Frere ends up at another school, I think Florida is a really good spot for the 2 guys from Apopka, William Barnes and Ed Monolith. But, just kind of widening their board with these 2 new offers. So, like I said, a productive week for Florida.
Yeah, talking about that productive week, you mentioned the offensive lineman Richard Garage committing, and it helped bolster Florida to the number 6 team in 247 Sports team recruiting rankings. 18 commitments for now for the 2018 class, number 1 class in the SEC. Blake, they seem to be in a good spot here with the second half of the season going on, and you don't necessarily know, and I'm sure, they were asked, and they've been asked after visits as well, but some of these commits with the way the season's going, what kind of seems to be the message from the staff, and what kind of seems to be the message from the recruits that it doesn't really matter what's going on the field right now?
I think the thing that really sticks out that Florida really seems to be kind of telling these prospects is, look at the young players out there. There's opportunity. And I think that that's what guys are really kind of picking up on in the commits. That just kind of seems to be the thing that's repeated between a lot of the commitments. There's true freshmen. There's redshirt freshmen, early players there that are getting meaningful reps at Florida. I can do that as well. And that's kind of the thing that Florida's telling them. There are some struggles on the field this year just between, suspensions and injuries and, maybe some things not clicking at times. But, all in all, there really are a lot of young players there. So these guys are really seeing, they're really testing these guys early. Some of these guys, Marco Wilson and whatnot, guys like that, they look good as true freshmen. So, that's been a positive too, that Florida's kind of had to lean on this season some, and it kind of also sticks to this class too, that it kind of seems that they are being told that, your guys' class, number 1 in the SEC, number 7 nationally. We've got the number 119 class on the way too. You guys can be these classes that can change the corner for Florida and kind of turn the page and get things maybe going to where things were in the mid 2000s and whatnot, where, a lot of these guys grew up watching the Tim Tebow's and whatnot that they always mention, whenever they talk about Florida and stuff. So, I do think that has helped. And, I think this class really does seem to be kind of taking that and kind of working with it. And they all seem to be excited to come in and hopefully make an impact early.
Talking about making an impact early, and after the performance of Felipe Frank so far this year, everybody's excited for Matt Corral, and Doug Nussmeier went out to California and attended Matt Corral's game last Friday night. Corral 10 of 13, 320 yards, and as you mentioned, 5 touchdowns for his team's homecoming game. Of course, there's a big connection to Doug Nussmeier there, and the much maligned Doug Nussmeier, of course, so far this season. Can you explain the connection there? We know it started at Friday Night Lights when Corral came in and Nussmeier and McElwain talked to him. Kind of seemed to be a connection there. Would Florida be in danger if Doug Nussmeier is no longer the offensive coordinator at Florida?
I'm not sure. I think that's kind of hard to tell. Yes, Doug Nussmeier was a big reason in recruiting Corral. He was the one who, reached out to. But, you got to think, too, Florida really – let's see, he committed in July. I think Florida really started to kind of heat things up. I think it was like, maybe late May, June, something around there. That's kind of where this name kind of popped up. So, it's not like, him and Doug Nussmeier have this relationship that goes back, years into his freshman year, like a lot of these relationships do now in recruiting. You see these guys, they get offered as freshmen and sophomores and such, but that wasn't necessarily the case. I think Corral would be one of those people that would obviously want to see who the hire is and things like that a normal recruit would have. But you also have to think here too, he's an early enrollee. Usually coaching changes and things, even if they do happen like that, they happen right after that kind of period right there. So, it's kind of hard to tell really what that relationship would do. I guess the question would be, what would happen? What could Florida happen down the road with, if they want to go another direction with offensive coordinator, if he stays, whatever they have, whatever route that is. I think Matt would want to know, but I also kind of wonder where the timing would be too. That's something that I have wondered myself as well.
You talk about timing, and Jim McElwain kind of brought it up in his Monday press conference too, the early signing period. Is there any, inkling or evidence that, this has played a role in the staff's recruiting? And, it looks like it's probably going to help at least launch this 2018 class.
Florida really has always kind of, at least under McElwain, has kind of put a lot of emphasis in their early enrollees. If you kind of look back the last couple signing classes that McElwain's had, they've been pretty heavily, guys that are going to enroll early. He really likes that. And I think that's why you've seen so many freshmen that have played at Florida. Some of them are early enrollees. Some of them haven't. It's just kind of just a timing kind of thing. But I do think that McElwain likes that, especially with a quarterback like Matt Corral. You get him in your system in the spring, and you kind of get him. Guys always say, I can get all the times of him yelling at me out of the way in the spring, and then when the fall comes, I can kind of take my meaningful reps. So that's kind of the narrative that a lot of guys have said. But, early signing class, yeah, I'm sure Florida really likes that because it's something that, if a guy does want to get his signing out of the way early, they can go ahead and do that. But McElwain and them, they don't really seem like guys that really pressure guys into it. So, I think there's probably some shades of gray there. If a guy is on board and wants to do it, I'm sure they have no problem. That, 5-star offensive tackle is like, yeah, coach, I'm on board, and they feel good with it. Obviously that would be something they do. They do pitch, though, more of guys that are going to enroll early, sign early, and show up on campus early. That is kind of been a point of emphasis with McElwain.
Blake, we got some, crazy eye-popping stats here from running back commit Damien Pierce out of Bainbridge, Georgia. 1,540 rushing yards, averages 10.2 yards a rush, 151 carries, 220 yards per game, 25 touchdowns on the season, all of those rushing. I mean, these are crazy. Zamir White is the only other running back I can think of in the nation where you kind of see stats like this. And I'm not going around and looking at every running back, kind of just SEC, Florida, sure. Georgia, we see those type of stats, comparing recruits to each other. But I mean, these are unreal. And you look at some of his highlights. I mean, he is a man amongst boys out there right now.
I know. I feel like every week I'm doing some kind of little thing of his highlights where he's like, Florida running back scores 4 touchdowns in a game. That it gets kind of hard to write that headline. I'm trying to think of something different every time. So I'm like, Florida's running back commit is very good. I think that's what I'm going to do next week. But, he's been awesome. I think if you look at it, throughout he's been there in high school, he's kind of been the workhorse for that offense. He has kind of been, the point of emphasis for them. He really does seem to kind of carry the team just from watching them. But, I mean, he's been on a tear this year. It's funny, on Gator Bait today, we were actually talking about, if a rankings bump could come for him. And I think he's a guy that has deserved it. I think when you put together that kind of stats and, comparing those to, 5 stars, like you said, Zamir White, guys like that, I mean, that's good company to have in whenever you're putting a season up like that. So I think he should be in the conversation for a rankings bump. I think the work he's put in, I don't even think he's actually an all-star game kid. So, that could be a guy that, could come in maybe with a late invite and, even kind of produce more just for his ranking, just more games on tape. You can see more things like that. But, I think that he's done enough to really kind of catch the eye, at least of me. And I think that he's a guy that deserves a rankings bump when that time does come.
Yeah, let's head South Florida a little bit more, American Heritage. You mentioned Chatfield and Schwartz, and those guys seem to be 2 targets where a lot of Florida fans and a lot of you guys who cover that seem to be guys who could be on commit watch for the Gators still. And some people thought it would have happened by now, especially with Schwartz. Anything to worry about there with the Gators? Do you still think they're Gators in the end? I know with Schwartz, it's kind of with the way the wide receiver recruiting has gone and who they have committed already, kind of in limbo, I guess, a little bit there. But, those are 2 guys from that program who really stand out for the Gators.
Sure. I think that Chatfield is one of those guys. I think he just really wants to take visits. I think if he wasn't a kind of a regular in Gainesville, you would kind of have some worry that, man, he hasn't been here in a while, but he showed up at Miami last weekend. I think that as a team, if there is one that's like kind of on the outside looking in to watch because they have not offered yet, I think that would be a kind of a team to look at. Chatfield's had a pretty good season so far. I think he's obviously an elite prospect, and I think that's one that Miami could look at. I don't really know where he stacks up on their board. But, obviously Florida looks really good. He's gotten him on campus twice for an unofficial visit. They're most likely going to get him on campus for an official visit. Miami is kind of one of those players where it's kind of what happens there. We'll see. LSU is a team to watch. He's mentioned Ohio State some still too, but I think Florida is kind of the team to beat there still, and I feel pretty good about that one there. Schwartz, I feel good about too. He seems to. I've heard that maybe it's his mom that has a little bit of reservations about Florida, wants him to. She's urging him to take these visits, and I think that's why we haven't seen him take a commitment yet, just so she can have her son check things out. Houston is on him pretty big about just running track. That there's some interest there. I believe Auburn.
Carl Lewis, right?
And he's recruiting him really hard. I believe he was actually on the sidelines Friday at their game. Okay. So you have your track coach out there. I think that's a team that he's obviously looking at because there's some intrigue with being coached by him. Auburn is kind of the other school that he's watching, but I still feel good about Florida. I think that it would kind of depend on what happens with Florida's wide receivers class to where where he fits. I think he is a guy that they like enough, his speed, and I think that that's enough for them to fit him into this class. I don't think it's right now that he's not a take or anything like that. But I do think that there are some numbers that Florida would rather address at other positions than wide receiver. So I don't think that's why they're, you got to commit now. We have to know where you stand. I think that's why Florida really hasn't pressured him because wide receiver really isn't a big need if you look at the class between 18 and 19. So, but I do like Florida there. I think that's one that eventually gets done. Unless a guy like Mark Pope comes in and right. takes that spot. I think that's really, for me, that's the thing that it would really kind of lose Schwartz's spot if that were to happen. But I still really do like Florida's chances. The other guys at Heritage that I know, Tyson Campbell and Patrick Surtain, I think Florida's in it, but I do think they have some work to do there. But, obviously 2 really good prospects in Florida. They're high on their board, and Florida really likes them both a lot.
I got some Twitter questions, Blake, but the one that I got the most, so I won't give it to just one person because this one's been sent on the YouTube channel tonight live a lot and on Twitter a lot. But it's been pretty simple and plain. What's the defensive tackle board look like, and what's the linebacker board look like?
It's interesting because right now I think it's one that Florida is looking to maybe add some guys. I think it's one that we're going to see some new names pop up. I think as far as linebacker, Alabama commit Quay Walker is one to watch. Florida went to see him this past week. He still mentions interest in Auburn, Florida State, Florida. He hasn't visited Florida in quite a while, so I do think that getting him on campus is really important just because he's been sort of a regular at Auburn here recently. Channing Tindall, the 4-star, that's obviously Florida's top linebacker target right there. Really like him a lot. That they're really high on him. He was expected to make a commitment in September. It really seemed like the hometown South Carolina Gamecocks were going to get that commitment. I still think that they're the team to beat there. But he wanted to, take some time, take some more visits. So, that was obviously good for Florida to get him to delay there, gets him a chance to get him on campus. He's been on campus twice now. Florida, they feel good, but I don't think that right now that they feel like they would be the one that would get him now. I do think that I think Florida does feel that South Carolina is their biggest competition there. And then Richard Jabuner, the guy, he's a 4-star linebacker outside of in Georgia up there. Auburn is another team, probably the team to beat for him right now. But he did show up to the Tennessee-Florida game earlier this fall. And he left saying, Florida really has been recruiting me a lot harder. I really like Florida. This visit really impressed me. I'm hearing from him a lot more. Florida has his attention. I do think that they're chasing Auburn right now. Getting him on campus for, maybe the Florida State game, something like that, I think would really help Florida a lot. But right now I do think that Florida is really chasing a lot of guys right now that they don't seem to be the team to beat for. These guys at linebacker or even defensive tackle. Malcolm Lamar, the Oregon commit, is a guy that looks like a defensive end now. I think he's one that grows into a tackle. Florida is in touch with him. That's probably the only team that's in touch, but he seems pretty solid with Oregon. Feels like he has a better chance to play there early. And, I think that they've done a really good job recruiting him. Nesta Silvera, the Miami commit, seems pretty locked in there with the Hurricanes. Right. Really good season for them. Obviously, doesn't help Florida trying to sway him. But I do think that if he is a guy that chooses to take some visits down the road, I think Florida is a pretty good shot at getting one of those. Jordan Davis, he's a guy out of Mallard Creek High School, same one as a lot of guys that are, TJ Moore, DJ Humphreys, guys up there, from that same high school. Florida went to see him this past week. I'm not really sure what's going on in that recruitment. It's kind of one that's kind of hard to get some information out of. I'm not really even sure where Florida stands there, but obviously going to see him, he's a guy that, is somewhere on that radar for Florida. And then I'm looking at the other one here, Rick Sandage. It's a guy up there in the Carolinas. I think Carolina is a team that's pretty solidly the team to beat there. I think if there was a 2, it's probably Georgia. So, another guy that Florida's chasing for. Christian Barrymore, it's a guy that, he was a Temple commit probably, I think it was like 2.5, 3 weeks ago. And now he's got Bama, Georgia, Florida. He's got offers from, elite schools. So, he's a guy that's kind of been a late bloomer, has really blew up late there. Florida did a good job getting kind of an early offer in there, so to say, since he's gotten, 15, 20 offers in about a span of 2 weeks. So, it's a guy to keep an eye on. But right now, Florida really probably needs to hit reset on both of those boards. And I think at one point we're going to see perhaps some new offers come out soon.
Gotcha. So I mentioned the Twitter questions, and I got a few here. I'll throw at you. So the first one comes from Chad E. Anderson, and this is pretty simple. Who is on decommit watch?
I think right now, I think you have to look at Jamar Chase, the wide receiver, Jacob Copeland, 2 guys that have taken visits to other schools twice this season already. Chase going to LSU twice, Copeland going to Bama twice. I think that if you had to pick one, I think probably Chase is the one that I would keep an eye on more. He's talking about official visits to Florida, TCU, Georgia, LSU after the season. So I think that there's obviously some concern there whenever you have one of your highest rated commits, taking so many visits like that and seeing the hometown team so many times. Those 2 guys are really the ones to stand out. Other than that, I think Corey Gamage, the wide receiver from down south, and Jalen Williams, a guy out there in Central Florida part of Tampa, St. Petersburg. I think those are 2 guys to watch. They're talking about taking visits to other schools. Florida has a crowded wide receivers class. I think it's just more or less just kind of seeing what else is out there. I believe Gamage has talked about visits to Auburn, I think is one that he's mentioned. Jalen Williams, whenever I talked to him last after a game, when he took a Florida visit, said that he was going to take all 5 official visits. Wasn't really sure yet. Seemed very solid. I think that if they do take those visits, they could be guys to watch. But if they remain solid and whatnot, I think it's more of those things that we'll watch them if they start taking visits, so to say. So, but other than that, I think Chase and Copeland are the 2 guys to really kind of keep an eye on right now, at least.
Gotcha. And Lucas Mann sends this one. I sent it on Twitter. What is the biggest area Mac needs to focus on in recruiting in the future classes?
I think really And I think it's kind of something they addressed this year, and it's kind of just adding some more of those guys that have that killer instinct on the trail. A guy that's going to kind of the closers, like Jawan Sider. I think Corey Bella has done a good job for 19, kind of closing some guys down. Obviously, Brad Davis is doing a good job with the offensive line class. I don't think if Brad Davis is at Florida, I don't think Florida gets Richard Garage. I don't think that they land him like that. I think that that's something that, getting some of these guys on board early, spring commitments, summer commitments, where you can kind of ride that momentum into the fall. And I think that's something that Mac addressed this year, going forward. Something to look at, is maybe just adding more of those guys on the staff, just continuing to kind of just, build these, these coaches there that, have that killer instinct that are going to go and they're going to try to close these things. And they're trying to get the best guys to come to Florida.
All right, and the last one at Preston Fuller. Where are the Gators with offensive lineman Nicholas Petit-Frere?
Good question.
Did I say his name right too?
Nicholas Petit-Frere.
Frere, okay, that was close.
Yeah, I think he just took an official visit to Notre Dame this past weekend. He's a kid that is a coach's dream because he is a good kid. He's a great player. And whenever he talks to the media, he gives absolutely nothing. He is humbled and grateful for everything. Everything is awesome. Everything is even. He's exactly what you want to send your college player out there to talk to the media, to give them nothing. So I'm sure that one day he will make a college coach very happy. I feel that the teams that I feel most comfortable to say that are in it, Alabama, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Florida, and that's probably about it right now that I would say are the kind of the main contenders there. Notre Dame this past weekend was an official visit he took. He obviously got to see a really good showing for the Irish out there as they really just demolished USC. He's big on academics. He's big on football, life after football. He does seem to kind of fit the mold of a Notre Dame kid. I think that the Irish are going to be a team to keep an eye on. Florida obviously has good academics. They're close to home and state. Mom, obviously, every parent loves the fact that you can come see your kid play multiple times a season. He's right in your own backyard. And then you mix the academics at Florida help. Really likes Brad Davis, really likes McElwain. Alabama, I think he respects more of kind of the approach to the program, how they have that, they're almost like a football factory. They seem to kind of no nonsense, get in and you're on your way to the NFL with a degree, most of the guys, especially a guy like Nick that's probably going to get a degree. I do think that I've had people tell me that if Alabama had better academics, he probably would have already committed there. Wow. But Notre Dame does seem to be really a key player now. I definitely feel that they're a team to watch. Ohio State is also another team to watch. Greg Schiano, his ties to Tampa, being there at Tampa Bay. His son actually played with Nick at Berkeley Prep, and he was kind of a guy that was out there helping on the sidelines, coaching things up. So Nick is actually very close with him. So that is really kind of a team to watch really closely in this recruitment because they are that close. Could Greg Schiano take a head coaching job somewhere else after the season? I think that would really hurt Ohio State's chances. And I've also been told by people that are close to Nick that if Greg did take a job somewhere and it was, kind of a respectable school with academics and football, I think that Nick would probably take a visit there just because that relationship with Greg Schiano is that close. But that being said, he's very open. He's going to continue to take visits. I wasn't expecting him to take a visit this early, an official visit. He seemed like he wanted to take a lot after the season, but I guess it's just, his schedule worked out. It was just something that kind of materialized last minute, that visit. So I think a lot of his visits going forward will be later. I do expect this recruitment to really be, kind of a hot, interesting topic in December, January, February.
Sounds good. Blake Alderman of GatorBait.net, 24/7 Sports, joining us here on Gators Breakdown. And Blake, of course, you know the recruiting world very well. But let's also get your thoughts on the current Gators and what's happening on the field. What are you looking for in changing for the second half of the season, or do you think we see the same old, same old? I've kind of now hit on this later this week on the show, but I think it's, if desperation was ever going to sink in for this staff, I think it kind of has to be now.
I'm kind of interested to see how they come out and approach things out in the Georgia weekend. You get that bye week to kind of put things together and install new things. Kind of being a Mac to be a guy that sits back and watches a lot of film. He's a guy that I know that's told the media after games, what are you going to do, Mac? Oh, I'm going to watch film. So I think that he's a guy that is going to use that bye week between his, being on the recruiting trail to kind of put together a game plan. I'm interested to see what Florida's identity is going forward this rest of the season. It seems like they really have been searching to find that identity. I think that they have a lot of success behind the run game. So I think that you're going to see them kind of capitalize on that. Florida's offense really seems to work best when they can set up the pass through the run. So I think Florida's going to have to really set that tempo running the ball, Their O-line, I think, has gotten good push over the last couple of weeks, in the run game. So I think if they set that tempo and they can kind of set up the passing game, I think it can make things easier for Franks. And I think that that's kind of the key to making the passing game work, is making things easier for Franks, get the running game going, and making things easy for him. And I think that that's how you can see Florida has some success on offense. But, it's one of those things to where we have to see which Florida team is going to come out. Sometimes that, you see Franks out there and he looks, deer in the headlights lost. I think if you can make things easier for him, I think that's where you can maybe see some success. And the bye week, I would think that, would give them some chance to kind of install some things and come out with something.
Yeah, I'm kind of extending on that. I kind of agree. I've said that going into the rest of the season, I'd kind of like to see Florida be a 70-30% run team. Right now, the kind of the ratio, that's kind of where I think this needs to be right now. But the problem with that this week is you're playing Georgia, and that may not be the best time to see that. So I think we know Frank's going to have to make some plays with his arm and stuff, because going 70-30 may not work out too well against Georgia here. Blake, I want to ask you about some of the young players, kind of tying in recruiting, because these guys were just playing high school football a year ago, and now they're playmakers for Florida in Kadarius Toney, Malik Davis, C.J. Henderson. Those guys and even more making an impact. Is any of that surprise you, that these true freshmen are making such a big impact for this Gators team right now?
I'm really not surprised with Marco Wilson. I think that his dad, has done a good job when you see kind of the technique that Quincy and he kind of came in with, being a former, college and pro guy himself. You can tell that his kids were going to come in with a really high IQ for the game of football. So I'm not really so much surprised there. The guy that I'm really most surprised with this season is probably C.J. Henderson. He was a guy that was tall, had the frame, extremely fast. I thought he was going to be a guy that was going to come in and really impact the return game, maybe, or the kick return, punt return, something like that. You got this 4.2, 4.3 speed, that doesn't grow on trees. And that's something I thought that's where he would make his most impact. But, he comes out in the first two games, he's, pick six back-to-back games. I think at times he does show that he is a little raw in some areas, but, overall, he's sticking with some guys, as a true freshman, playing a lot of snaps. So I think you have to be impressed with what he's put together with. Just kind of being that guy, watching him, like you said, last year at the Under Armour game, and thinking, this guy's maybe a year or two away from being a really good player. And, lo and behold, here we are his freshman year, and he's out there making plays, in game one. So, that was kind of one that really surprised me. Malik Davis was a guy that really didn't get a lot of love maybe in recruiting rankings, but this is Hillsborough County's leading rusher all time, so this is a guy that came in with a lot of production. I am a little surprised, and I think that maybe him coming out and playing like this is obviously for Jordan Scarlett not being there, and I don't think we'd maybe see him get as many snaps as that with Jordan there, but him coming out and not being there and seeing Malik kind of make that step, I think has been impressive, because I knew he had the ability to do that because he's done it through high school. And, you've seen him do that, and he's come to camp. He's been a guy that's always competed, but I wasn't expecting him to do that kind of at his freshman level. So, this is a guy that we're talking about could be the MVP of Florida season thus far. So, that's impressive for a true freshman.
And Blake, going to the quarterback, of course, Felipe Franks, redshirted last year. Could we see how raw he was coming out of high school and not a lot of quarterback coaching from there? Do you think that plays more into what we're seeing from Felipe Franks right now? And did you think he might be further along in his redshirt freshman year?
I don't. I don't think that this is kind of what I expected. He's a guy that was really raw, was a really highly ranked guy. And I think a lot of his ranking was really towards what he could be. This was a guy that, whenever you're talking about his Elite 11 year, the coaches are saying, this guy could be the best quarterback from a couple years down the road. His talent, his raw talent, this is a lot of what ifs have been with Felipe Franks, basically, and I think that when you see it, he has a really strong arm. That's always been the thing, but it's just kind of the little things of just kind of absorbing things. This is the guy that, didn't get, a lot of these guys now in high school, these are eighth graders that have personal throwing coaches and this coach and that coach. And, they have a lot of guys that kind of help them, at a young age. And Felipe didn't really have these things. He was a guy that, I think my buddy Zach Alberti had a story where it was, this was a guy that after school was going and feeding goats at his family's farm, So, this was a guy that, was doing a lot of things that a lot of other quarterbacks would do. So, I do think there was a little bit of he was a little behind as far as kind of reading defenses and stuff, just not getting maybe the coaching or the attention or whatever you want to call it with that. So I do think that, no, I'm not surprised with where he's at, because this is the guy that's going to have to earn, he's going to have to really take his lumps and kind of learn on the fly. I mean, he's still a redshirt freshman. So, I do think that I expected this from him, but I do think that this right here, him playing it and maybe not getting things right, I think it's the best thing for him, because it's going to teach him. It's going to kind of help him to get to where he wants to be and where fans, coaches, everybody want him to be. This is the best thing, is learning and kind of, playing these things and learning from your mistakes. And I think that that's something that what I'm more interested to see going forward for him is how he responds to a lot of this year, because, he has taken and left a lot on the field this year still with guys open. And, so I'm interested to see where he takes this and kind of feeds off of it, because this is a guy that really seemed to get that fire lit under him when Malik Zaire enrolled on campus. So this is a kid that I will give him, when he's faced with adversity, he has responded well. So I am curious to see how he responds from this.
Sounds good. And Blake, kind of to finish out the season, we know the Gators have Georgia this weekend in Jacksonville, then 2 road trips, Missouri and South Carolina, then host UAB in the season with FSU. So, from here right now, it's, October 23rd, 24th, when people will listen to this. How do you think the Gators, finish the season? And the way FSU is playing right now, that's pretty much a must-win game right now, right?
I know that seems to be the kind of the storyline of that game, is it could be the battle of for bowl eligibility. That seems to be the headline there. Now, the game that I'm really most interested to see is, I do think Georgia will get the best of Florida. I just think, just from looking at the team, I think this is a really good Georgia team. Fromm is obviously the X factor for them, where they do. And even stopping the run for Florida, which they have done okay at times. For me, the game that I'm most interested to see is that road game against South Carolina. That's the one I'm really curious to see how Florida plays on the road, in an environment that will probably be pretty live.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And just going back to last year, even after this Georgia game, win or lose against Georgia, after the Georgia game last year, they go to Arkansas and get their brains beat in a little bit. Now they got to go to Missouri, which is just as far as a road trip, and it's a noon game, so that's a scary scenario for the Gators as well.
Absolutely, that could be a trap game for Florida. Depending on, if Florida comes out and beats Georgia, like they have the last couple years, that could be a trap game for them coming off the high. And if not, if Florida does lose to Georgia, that could be kind of one of those spiral games to where it's like, what's your season going to do then? So that is an interesting game there coming off that. But, Florida obviously can't get ahead of themselves and have to worry about Georgia first.
Sounds good. Blake, hey, man, thanks for joining me, breaking down recruiting and kind of a quick look ahead to the Gators the rest of the season.
Yeah, I'm like a jack of all trades, I guess.
Hey, you are. That's why I got you on here.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
All right, Blake, thanks, man.
Anytime.
All right, Blake Alderman from 24/7 Sports, GatorBait.net, joining us here on Gators Breakdown. So, yep, kind of an eventful day for the Gators and kind of a weird day for the Gators. I kind of just hit that one by myself here, and it's the elephant in the room, of course. Can't just be ignored. But Jim McElwain's Monday press conference, McElwain mentioned that players and his family have received death threats from fans, and I'm just going to assume it's been the last couple of weeks with the LSU loss and the Texas A&M loss, and this sent shock waves through the media. And McElwain wouldn't really expound on it much after saying it initially in the same press conference, and then comes Monday evening in a statement from Senior Associate Athletic Director Steve McLean. And, quote, it was the University Athletic Association takes the safety of our student athletes, coaches, staff, and families very seriously. Our administration met with Coach McElwain this afternoon, and he offered no additional details. That's the weird part. Jim McElwain this afternoon, and he offered no additional details. So I know there was kind of some skepticism from some Gator fans out there when McElwain came out and said it initially. And this statement from the university didn't really help matters in people who thought that. It is a weird situation. There's really no other way to spin it. People have kind of asked why there's no evidence, or why haven't those people been turned in. I don't know if we know that. I know McElwain said it didn't. He know that he probably wasn't going to turn the people in, or hasn't turned it over to authorities or whatever. And it's kind of a weird scenario. But first of all, I think where I would go with that is, why even bring this up publicly in the first place? I don't think it does anything to help the University of Florida, whether it's true or not. I mean, I'll tend to believe Jim McElwain. I don't think he's just going to come out and say that for the heck of it. Or, it kind of has been brought up that maybe he said it and didn't mean it, but it was kind of too late to backtrack. But if that's not true, you kind of have to backtrack that. So I think there was no positive way to spin it by saying it and bringing it out publicly. That was the first mistake. I do not think it should have been brought out. It does nothing to help the University of Florida. And if other coaches, I'm not saying this is going to happen right now or anytime soon, but the word gets out that other coaches, is this a message to for that out there to get out there? Is this a message where it doesn't send a good message to whoever follows Jim McElwain? I don't know when that will be. I don't know if it's after this season. I don't know if it's after next season or a couple seasons down the road. But other teams will spin this. Other coaches will spin this, saying, do you want that when you go there? Now, don't get me wrong. It's going to be spun in a way where it's negative towards Florida, but this isn't exclusive to the University of Florida. There are some crazy fans out there, and this happens at every school. Now, we don't hear about it a lot because I don't think it's made public a lot. Now, we saw earlier this season where Kevin Sumlin, the Texas A&M head coach, was sent some crazy, stupid remarks by a fan. And it was pretty racist remarks at that. And there's no place for that. I mean, we're supposed to be fans. We're supposed to enjoy this game. If you can't enjoy it in a way where you can have fun with it, then move on. Find something else to grasp onto. But it's just, I don't understand why this was brought forward by Jim McElwain. It just didn't make a lot of sense to me. It does nothing to help the University of Florida. I'll say that again. I don't think I can say it enough. There's no benefit whatsoever to that. And then for the university to have to come out with a statement as well and address the elephant in the room. It wasn't I mean, ESPN picked it up. It was on the front page of their website. It was CBS picked it up. It was CBS Sports. It was on the front page of their website. This was like I said, it sent shockwaves through media. It sent shockwaves through Gator Nation. And it's not a good look right now. And kind of, first of all, it shouldn't happen in the first place. And then I don't think it should have been brought to light necessarily. So, shame on those fans who sent that and, threaten players and coach just for a game. We gotta have fun with this, and we can sit here and critique all we want to. That's fine and dandy, but don't threaten people. So we'll see where it goes from here. As I said, it is a weird situation, and where does it go from here? I don't think this is the end of it. McElwain will have another press conference, especially. I mean, another thing to look out for is that Wednesday SEC coaches teleconference. As I said, this was a national story. It hit the nation pretty hard on the sports pages of ESPN and CBS Sports. So, look out for the SEC coaches teleconference for that to really get blown up. And then Jim McElwain will also probably speak to the media again Wednesday afternoon and probably be asked about it again there as well. So, of course, big game against Georgia, and we're and on this Monday, it's talk about not the game versus Georgia. It's about a statement Jim McElwain said today about death threats from fans. So, we'll see where it goes from here. This is not the end of it. We'll see where it goes. And it's just not a good look. Not a good look. So, I'll kind of end the show on that. And, we can talk about it on social media. We'll talk about it on Twitter. Remember, you can follow me at GatorDave_SEC. So, maybe take a look at it. Maybe it's some of the pressure Jim McElwain's kind of been faced with the last couple of weeks. So we know the uproar of Gator Nation, but some of that's warranted, but the threats are not. So it's kind of you guys have listened to this podcast enough. It's I've had this moniker. It's never a dull moment in Gator Nation, and certainly not the week of Georgia and going through this. It was kind of tough. We don't. We would rather just talk football. That's what we would rather do here on Gators Breakdown, and that's kind of our forte. But this kind of stuff right here is not, but it has to be talked about, and it will be talked about. We won't shove it off, and we won't ignore it. It's kind of is what it is at this point. So, guys, thanks for listening to this episode. Blake came in here and threw some recruiting knowledge our way, and nobody better in the business, in my opinion, who can sit here and throw the recruiting game around a lot. Blake and those guys over at 24/7, Luke Stampini as well, and then Thomas Goldcamp there, who joined me last week. So thanks to those guys for always supporting us and the interaction we have on the boards there and on Twitter with those guys. So thanks to Blake again for joining me here on Gators Breakdown. Remember, I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. So we talked some recruiting, had a little bit of look ahead, and Will Miles and I later this week will have our Georgia preview, working on a special guest, and we'll see. I will announce it probably sometime on Tuesday if I get the confirmation. So Gator fans will love that. Kind of going a different direction. Won't necessarily be a Georgia guest kind of previewing the Bulldogs, but it will be somebody who knows Georgia well and Florida well. So kind of a little tease there. So I'll be on the lookout for that. Hopefully I can confirm it, and hopefully it will happen. And we'll talk some Gators football against the red and black from Georgia, those Georgia Bulldogs. So I'm David Waters. Thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.